Have you ever been on an airplane when a strong side wind blows or when a storm hits an airplane? What if its engines are failing? Yeah, that's not the best thing that can happen to you. We wish you'd never feel that way. However, when something happens to an airliner during a flight, pilots have to make a lot of effort and show their skills to level the aircraft and land it without casualties. In this video we have collected for you the 10 most extreme airliner landings, which miraculously ended successfully. So, are you ready to be thousands of miles above the ground? Then, let's go! An airplane without a roof. You can ride with the wind on the fastest and steepest rides in many amusement parks, but you have never seen such an extreme. Passengers of the Boeing 737 once had to go down from a height of 7,300 meters in an airplane without a roof, and even with the hurricane headwind at 530 kilometers an hour. The short flight between the Hawaiian cities of Hilo and Honolulu should have taken only 35 minutes, but at 23 minutes, when the airliner reached the necessary altitude, there was an explosive decompression. The cockpit door and the roof of the Boeing above the 6 front rows just blew down. The passengers found themselves in the open air at -45 degrees centigrade. They didn't have time to unbuckle their seat belts, and fortunately that saved their lives. The commander of the aircraft began an emergency descent to 3,000 meters at over 500 kilometers an hour. And, 11 minutes after the accident, the captain landed the plane on one right engine. To everyone's luck, all passengers and crew members survived and were safe. The pilot's overboard. There is hardly another person in the world who had a ride on the roof of an airplane. The experienced pilot Tim Lancaster, who flew more than 11,000 hours, was the commander of an aircraft heading in 1990 from Britain to Spain. At 7:20 in the morning, the plane took off from Birmingham Airport and headed for the sunny country. After 13 minutes, the plane reached an altitude of 5,000 meters and the commander quietly loosened his seatbelts, but suddenly there was a rumble and the windshield from the commander's side flew in an unknown direction and the pilot himself followed. Luckily, his legs got stuck in the cockpit and the poor man was nailed to the body of the plane by a wild wind from the outside. The flight attendant grabbed the captain with both hands, preventing him from finally flying out of the window. The co-pilot started an emergency descent and transmitted a distress signal. They were flying to the nearest airport for an emergency landing, frozen, with broken arms, but Tim was taken off the plane, and 5 months later he was able to sit at the helm again. The passengers and crew owe their extreme adventure to the mechanics. The day before this flight, he bolted the glass in the plane with the wrong screws and made a mistake literally by a millimeter in diameter. No matter what, even the most desperate Hollywood stuntman did not do it. Landing in the Hudson. It may seem strange, but one duck or some other bird can sometimes be enough to hit a plane. It's true it happens very rarely, but here's the situation. The passengers on the flight from New York to Seattle had to endure an emergency drive to the Hudson River after an Airbus A320 was attacked by a pack of gray geese. Less than a minute after takeoff, the plane staggered and passengers saw flames erupt from the engines. The geese fright in the engines caused them to fail. The commander of the aircraft informed the dispatcher of the collision with a flock of birds and sent a distress signal. Seconds later, it became clear that he would not be able to keep the car in the air and reach the runway. A risky, but only way to save a crew of 150 passengers was to land on the Hudson, which the pilot did. As a result of the incredible professionalism of the crew, everything turned out well in landing, but the live passengers got on the wings of the floating plane, waiting for the arriving rescue workers. A plane without a nose. And this story is about the heroism at its finest. On Thursday 27 July in Istanbul, the Ukrainian pilot Alexander Akapov made a heroic landing of the passenger liner of the Turkish Airlines. At Ataturk Airport, the plane with the Ukrainian crew took off from the airport, Istanbul to Borja. At an altitude of 4,000 feet, a hailstorm broke the entire nose and cockpit window. The captain decided to return. There were 121 passengers and 6 crew members on board. The Ukrainian pilots and 2 Turkish stewardesses showed courage during this incident. The commander landed the plane blindly looking only through a vent. It's unbelievable. When he did it, entire Ataturk Airport apron applauded him. The pilots of the other planes were flashing their lights and just coming aboard to shake Alexander's hand. We think it's really worthy of respect. Cloud of smoke. The Boeing 747 was on its usual long flight from London to New Zealand Auckland, with several stops in India, Malaysia and Australia. But a few minutes after its overnight departure from Kuala Lumpur, something sinister began to happen with the plane. The cabin was suddenly filled with smoke, and the windows in the cockpit were covered with flickering sparks. This phenomenon is known to pilots as the lights of St. Elmo. You can see it on the wings of airliners during a thunderstorm, but the weather radar didn't indicate a storm. In an instant, flickering white light enveloped the entire aircraft, and passengers could see flames erupt from all four engines. To everyone's dismay, they all failed. The co-pilot and flight engineer tried to restart them many times, but unsuccessfully. Everything seemed to be lost, but suddenly the real miracle happened. At an altitude of 4,100 meters, suddenly fourth engine started, and behind it all the others came to life. The plane could fly to Jakarta Airport and land there. 248 passengers and 15 crew members landed unharmed on the island. And it was all caused by a volcanic ash cloud into which the aircraft landed. Landing above the beach. What do you usually do at the beach? Surely relax and enjoy the peace and quiet. However, only if you're not at Maha Beach on St. Martin's. The fact is that the beach is in close proximity to the international airport. The planes fly so low that you might even be blown away by the airflow, against which the local authorities are constantly warning. Princess Juliana Airport has a very short runway, only 2,180 meters, which makes the planes take off and land as low as possible. Sometimes they can be only 10 meters above the ground, which makes all tourists look up and point their cameras at the passing ship. These landings themselves near a huge crowd of people are very dangerous, and no one knows how the next landing will go. Would you be able to relax when every time? For a few minutes, you're gonna have these huge things flying over your head? No. Hurricane. Landing in a storm is not the most pleasant thing that can happen to a liner, but unfortunately, it happened to a plane that landed in Hamburg. Nothing foretold trouble, but the strongest gusts of wind at up to 120 kilometers per hour associated with the passage of Hurricane Emma began to knock it off course. Despite all the difficulties, the brave pilot decided to land. But when the plane almost touched the ground, a strong gust tilted the aircraft to the left, so much that the left wing hit the ground at 250 kilometers per hour. Luckily, the pilot managed to level the liner, but the plane went beyond the runway, and something had to be done about it. Then the crew took the Airbus to the air again, and in the end the tragedy was avoided. Having circled the airport, the plane successfully landed, despite severe wing damage. Faulty chassis. How would you feel if you were safely flying aboard an airplane in which the chassis wouldn't be let out? We'd definitely go gray after that soft landing. We think the same thing happened to the passengers of the liner that landed in Boston. 116 passengers and 5 crew members were on board. For an unknown reason, the landing gear front stand was not fully released, and the pilots decided to land the plane without it. 30 meters the plane ran its nose in the landing strip, but, nevertheless, the aircraft received minimal damage and, of course, none of the passengers and crew members were injured. The commander of the plane was definitely good and did everything right. Glider Gimli. Such a funny name was given to Air Canada's Boeing 767, which once performed an amazing feat. The 132-ton airliner with failed engines carefully planned from a height of 12,000 meters and landed safely at an abandoned airbase Gimli right during the car races. This is unbelievable, but the situation was also complicated by the lack of electricity, which in addition, caused many of the pilot's instruments to shut down and the pressure in the hydraulic system to become so low that the pilots could barely move ailerons and rudders. The crew showed their best skills, and no one was hurt. The incident was caused by a mistake by Ottawa Airport Ground Services, who mixed up the kilos and pounds. Just imagine, as a result, the airplane tank received less than 5 tons of kerosene instead of the required 20 tons. The only thing that saved the situation was the presence of an experienced pilot in the cockpit who knew about the existence of an abandoned airbase and, for sure, luck. Somewhere in the taiga. On September 7, 2010, a Tu-154 aircraft of Alrosa Airlines landed in a remote Siberian wilderness, following the route Yakutia-Moscow. The point is that 3.5 hours after takeoff there was a complete power loss on board. Most of the devices were cut off, the fuel pumps stopped. It became impossible to control the wing mechanization. The fuel tank in the fuselage still had a reserve of only 30 minutes of flight time. Dropping to an altitude of 3,000 meters, the pilots started looking for a suitable landing site for an 80-ton monster. And here it is, luck. Ahead of it, a concrete strip of the airport called Isma appeared, but it was very short, only 1,350 meters. The pilots, of course, were able to land a badly controlled plane, but it was impossible to stop at the lane. The Tu-154 had to roll straight into the village, but everything ended well. None of the 72 passengers and 9 crew members were injured. If you have any exciting flight stories, share them in your comments. And if you think that the pilots of the planes are real pros, like. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any interesting new videos. Thanks for watching.